Hello, and welcome back to Marlowe's annual film ranking, where I list my top 11 films that I saw in the cinema this year. Now, this list is not based on any kind of objective criteria, but rather it is simply based on how much I enjoyed a film and how well I think the film was made, in my personal opinion. This means that you may or may not agree with the placement of some films, and I welcome you to politely and constructively explain your position in the comments below. Before we get to my list, I want to mention some noteworthy films I missed out on, because there are only so many hours in a day, and days in a week, and money in my wallet. For a start, I missed out on most of the Disney films like Dumbo, Aladdin, and Frozen 2, mostly because Disney films don't really hold much interest to me, and the only reason why I'd go see one would be because there was nothing else on I haven't already seen. In regards to horror films, I missed out on the remakes of Pet Sematary and Child's Play, but given their critical reception, it seems like they weren't going to be featured on this list anyway. However, I do lament the fact that I missed out on Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which did quite well critically. I also missed out on some noteworthy comedies, such as Long Shot, Good Boys, and Jojo Rabbit. And finally, I unfortunately missed out on Star Wars: The Rise of the Skywalker, because at the time I'm uploading this video, my accessibility to a cinema is sadly limited as I'm overseas and won't be coming back until mid-April. So sadly, my films of 2020 list may be considerably shorter, but I shall do my best to watch as many films in the cinema whenever possible. One last thing I also want to do before I get to my top 11 is quickly run through some films that didn't make the list, but I still recommend for you to watch. Starting with Rocketman, a biopic of Elton John packed full of flamboyance and all of his greatest hits, and having the man himself be a producer of the film gives it that extra layer of authenticity. Had I been a bigger fan of Elton John and his music, I'm sure this would have ranked much higher. Destroyer, a grungy and brutal detective thriller starring Nicole Kidman, who looks on the verge of death. Understandably, it got very mixed reviews because of its raw depictions of violence and slow pace, so if you're sensitive to those things, I would steer clear. If Beale Street Could Talk, a romantic drama that's simultaneously sad and heartwarming, dealing with themes of racial tensions, police brutality, and poverty. Technically, this film is better made and more provocative than some of the films on my list, but the reason why I don't place it higher is because I don't feel like I was the target audience for this film, and so I cannot give it a fair assessment. However, I still recommend this film if you're into romantic dramas. Us. Jordan Peele returns to the horror genre with this bizarre film involving a family being terrorized by underground clones of themselves, or something like that. A unique horror film that masters the art of suspense and balancing it out with violence despite having some cliched characters in horror movie tropes. If you're a horror fan, don't miss this one. Fighting with My Family. Based on the documentary of the same name, this film follows the life of Saraya Knight, aka Paige, and her journey to become the youngest WWE Divas champion. Full of laughs and heart, this film was a pleasant surprise when it released, considering how it was the subject of ridicule by wrestling fans before its release. Never judge a book by its cover, as the old saying goes. If you're a wrestling fan, you've probably already seen this film, but if you're not, I'd say give it a watch. The Lego Movie 2, the second part. To all the cynics out there who see the Lego films as nothing more than just a feature-length commercial for Lego toys, lighten up. The Lego films are some of the most fun I've had in the cinema, and this film is in no two minds about what it is. It's a film about sentient building blocks and simply gives us everything we loved about the first film. Colorful characters, laugh-out-loud moments, creative and spectacular visuals, and it also offers a great moral for the kids about compassion. Also, shoutouts to Animal Logic, the Sydney-based animation studio who worked on this film. You guys are doing a fantastic job. And finally, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the latest film by Quentin Tarantino, and a love letter to Hollywood in the late 1960s. But seeing how I was born in 1994, many of the period references were completely lost on me. But despite this, the film manages to be a great character study on a failing actor struggling to stay relevant in a rapidly changing film industry. And with the star power of Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, this could only be an outstanding film. Honestly, this film should be on the list. Well, you may as well consider it a number 12 spot. Now with all the honorable mentions done, let's kick off the list proper. Here are my top 11 films of 2019. Number 11, Shazam. Ah yes, the real Captain Marvel film, and that's a joke for all you comic book nerds. Anyway, it's baffling to think that given my recent thoughts on superhero films, that this one would land in my top 11, let alone one by DC, whose recent film track record has been less than stellar. However, Shazam was a welcome change to the plethora of superhero films, a lighthearted take on the genre that feels like it was written for kids but never comes across as condescending or patronizing. Yes, a lot of the humor is childish, but you remember that Shazam is actually a 14-year-old teenage boy in an adult's body, so it's understandable. On top of that, it's just the right amount of humor and doesn't get tiresome or feel forced. But that's not to say that this film is satirical, as it still manages to be a decent superhero origin story, even if it is rather cliched and lacked a strong villain. Shazam is a good balance of comedy and action that doesn't resort to being a spoof film to get its laughs. It's a welcome break from the more serious superhero films we've been getting for the past decade. But it's also a film with a lot of heart and works as a coming-of-age film. There's a certain childlike charm to it that modern superhero films are missing today. Number 10, Knives Out. A modern take on the whodunit genre, Knives Out is fiercely intelligent, packed full of intrigue, and starring an ensemble cast who give this film massive star power and depict some despicable yet highly entertaining characters. As a young kid, one of my favorite shows was Detective Conan, and since then, I've always held an appreciation for murder mysteries. However, in recent years, it seems that there hasn't been any standout films in this genre, at least none that I can think of off the top of my head. So, seeing this film brought me back to the days of watching Detective Conan and trying to figure out what happened before the episode was over. But like then, this film is more clever than the audience and keeps throwing curveballs to make an unpredictable and nerve-wracking yet highly enjoyable experience. Strangely, this film also reminded me of an old episode of The Twilight Zone called The Masks. In the episode, an old man is dying and invites his family over who want nothing more than to inherit his wealth. The old man's dying wish is for everyone to gather around his deathbed wearing masks while he berates all of them for being horrible people and exposing them for their true character. In the same way, Harlan Thrombey, before his death at his birthday party, had alienated most of the family and leaves his massive wealth and publishing business to his nurse Marta, causing the whole family to turn against her, revealing that their kindness was just a facade, and as soon as money is involved, they will do anything to remove her from what they believe is their birthright. Knives Out is a fantastic murder mystery film that both stays true and updates the time-old whodunit genre, adding creative flair and clever, unpredictable swerves, and with an all-star cast, it can only be a fantastic film. Number 9, Dr. Sleep. Making a sequel to The Shining, one of the greatest and most bizarre horror films ever made, is a tall order. However, what's also interesting is that this film is more so an adaptation of Stephen King's book of the same name, which is a sequel to his original 1977 novel of The Shining. Yet it still works as a sequel to Kubrick's film, so going into the cinema, I had no idea what to expect. Well, in short, the film follows Danny 40 years after the events of The Shining. He meets a young girl named Abra who also has the mysterious shining power. Unfortunately, a group called the True Knot with similar powers are after Abra so they can feed on her spirit, all ending in a final showdown at the old Overlook Hotel where everything started. Now, what you just heard is a heavily abridged version of the plot, as it takes its time introducing the characters and plot points. In fact, Danny doesn't meet Abra until about an hour into the film. During the rest of the film, we mainly focus on Danny moving out of town, sobering up, and trying to establish a new life. We also see members of the True Knot and witness dissension among the group as they struggle to find psychic children to feed upon. The main highlights for me were seeing how each character uses their psychic powers, leading to some unique and creative cinematography, some of which was very akin to Kubrick's film, which I am a big fan of. During the film itself, especially the latter half, there's a foreboding and sometimes tragic atmosphere lingering, and you just know some bad stuff is going to happen. And you'd be right, some of the scenes, especially those involving the True Knot, were absolutely horrifying. Honestly, this is one of those films where the less I give away, the better the viewing experience will be. The only drawback would be that some of the plot points and appreciation for this film is lost if you haven't seen Stanley Kubrick's The Shining from 1980. But despite this, when compared to other horror films released this year, or at least those I've watched, this was something unique, bizarre, and in my mind, a worthy follow-up to The Shining. Number 8. Ford v Ferrari, aka Le Mans 66. Based on the rivalry between Ford and Ferrari during the latter half of the 1960s at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, Ford v Ferrari is a film that manages to appeal to both motorsports enthusiasts and casual viewers. Of course, being based on historical events does make you wonder how much of it was accurate and how much of it was embellished. But regardless of the facts, it remains a very compelling and exciting film, ending on one of the best finales of the year. The film covers Ford's failed buyout of Ferrari, the development of the GT40, finding the right driver, and ending with the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans. Throughout the film, we witness the engineering nightmare this project was and how the Ford Motor Company's bureaucracy was constantly hampering it. Emotions flare up and expensive prototype cars are destroyed, and finally, there's the race itself, one of the toughest events in all of motorsports. One can only imagine how excruciating the real 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans were, and even though we already know the results of the race 50 years onwards, the film still manages to subvert the viewer's expectations and make them think that quite possibly Ford will lose and all of their R&D on the GT40 was for nothing. The film benefited greatly from having the star power of Matt Damon and Christian Bale in the lead, Damon playing the confident Carroll Shelby, and Bale playing the bitter and short-tempered Ken Miles. The two make an unlikely duo, and yet despite there being plenty of speed bumps testing their friendship, you want to see the two succeed and overcome the seemingly impossible task of beating Ferrari. For a film that was over 2.5 hours long, it kept me engaged right until the end, as there was no wasted scene or shot. An amazing retelling of one of the greatest moments of motorsports history, this film offers some great thrills, laugh-out-loud moments, heartbreaking losses, and exhilarating triumphs. Even if you're unfamiliar with motorsports, as I was, I would still recommend it. Number 7. Promare. By far the craziest animated film I've ever seen this year. Promare tells the story of an elite group of mechanized firefighters who have to save the world from flame-wielding mutants called the Burnish. Now, if the premise wasn't enough to sell you on this film, then this probably will. It was produced by Trigger, the same animation studio that brought us Kill la Kill, Space Patrol Luluco, and Little Witch Academia. And leave it to Trigger to deliver one of the most over-the-top, mind-blowing, ridiculous, and visually intense films I've ever seen. This film is so bright and colorful, and combined with its unique visual style that Trigger is known for, this is another one of those films where every still frame is a work of art. The film mainly focuses on Gallo, a young firefighter, cocky and arrogant, but also full of heart. On the other side, we have the Burnish, led by Leo, calculating and remorseless, but given the mistreatment of his people, you can understand why. The Burnish are constantly on the run from the authorities as they were the cause of a great inferno that engulfed the whole world. Gallo and Leo cross paths throughout the film, and with each encounter, Gallo slowly uncovers how the Burnish are mistreated and questions his loyalty to the city of Permopolis and its governor. As cliched as some of the story tropes are, this film executes them perfectly. The Burnish's motives are clear and justified given their years of oppression and being labeled as terrorists, and Gallo was ignorant to the city's ulterior motives, which I'm not going to give away, but let's just say it involves a catastrophic natural disaster that spells the end of the whole world. This ends on a final battle scene so insane, I was completely at a loss for words. This film is so crazy that you just have to see it to believe it. Number 6. Ad Astra. The film tells the story of Roy McBride, Brad Pitt, who's assigned on a secret mission to find his father, Clifford McBride, Tommy Lee Jones, and the failed Lima Project spacecraft located around Neptune's orbit, a project tasked with finding intelligent life beyond the solar system. While this plot can lend itself to a thrilling sci-fi action film, instead, this film tries to depict space travel as realistically as possible, with large rockets and bulky spacesuits, and moves at a methodical pace rather than being a science fiction in the modern sense of the word. It's a welcome change to all the highly stylized spaceships we are so used to seeing in films like Star Wars or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It reminded me a bit of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which, although archaic by today's standards, tried to be a vision into the future rather than pure science fiction. But as with 2001, time will tell if the depictions of space travel in Ad Astra were spot on or laughable like the 1960s vision of the future. Let me emphasize again that this is not a sci-fi action film, but rather a space exploration drama that emphasizes realism and impressive depictions of outer space. This is another one of those films that can be watched muted and enjoyed on a purely visual level, so if you got bored watching 2001, then maybe this film isn't for you. But for someone like me, who's fascinated by space travel and loves pretentious slow-moving films that emphasize visuals, this film was right up my alley. Even if every minute of this film felt like 3, I was never bored or looked away confused. Number 5. Booksmart. A friend of mine described this film as the lesbian feminist version of Superbad, and although I haven't seen Superbad myself, judging by the plot synopsis on Wikipedia, that description is spot on. The film follows Molly and Amy, two best friends since childhood, but are considered pretentious by their peers because they spent their high school years studying instead of socializing. When Molly hears that her classmates got just as good grades despite not being as studious, she insists that her and Amy make up for lost time by going to a graduation house party. The film is split into 2 halves, with the first half is about them getting to the party and all the hijinks that can occur, and the second half taking place at the house party itself. Our 2 leads are socially awkward at first, but they slowly realize that they aren't so different from their fellow classmates. But of course there's drama and tension between our leads, and the night goes horribly wrong. I won't go into detail because it's best that you see it for yourself. In a strange way, I can sort of relate to the protagonists in that I also spent most of my high school years keeping my nose clean by burying it inside books and studying. Difference is, I stayed that way and didn't try to make up for lost time by going on a night-long bender. Instead, I internalized my deep-seated hatred for my fellow classmates and forever resented the quote-unquote popular kids culture. But sometimes I do wish I loosened up a little and enjoyed my younger years more. Even though I disliked my high school days, in a strange way, I kind of miss them. Maybe that's why this film resonated with me so much, and maybe that's what the film was trying to convey. It's a celebration of youth and all of its flaws. For such a crass and in-your-face comedy, it shows a lot of heart and genuine emotion. Number 4. Stan and Ollie. A biopic depicting the comedy duo's final tour of the UK and Ireland and the twilight years of their career. I went and saw this film with my dad, and he said that he was nervous throughout the whole film. He said it was because he really wanted the two to remain friends and finish the tour without any troubles. And I think that's a good summary of my feelings too. The 2 lead characters are so likable that you don't want anything bad to happen to them. However, there's plenty of turmoil between the 2 leads, from past disagreements resurfacing and health problems. The film is a bittersweet experience that offers plenty of laughs and heartfelt moments. Steve Coogan and John C. Reilly as Laurel and Hardy, respectively, were phenomenal as the comedy duo. From reenacting the classic Laurel and Hardy routines, right down to their appearance and their demeanor, it's as if the real Laurel and Hardy were brought back to life. And when they're not on stage, the 2 are so natural together, delivering lines as if they were just normal conversation. Beyond its acting, the film is also visually impressive, with some beautiful shots of the English countryside, and I don't know what it is, but something about the look of 1950s English towns I quite like. I'm a big fan of period settings, so this was quite pleasing to me. even if you're not familiar with Laurel and Hardy, you can still appreciate this film as a comedy and a film about two best friends who, despite some rough patches in their friendship and career, gave one last hurrah before making their curtain call. The world will remember Laurel and Hardy, and this film will only further cement their legacy. Number 3. Weathering with You. From the same writer and director as Your Name, Shinkai Makoto, comes another adolescent love story about a girl with supernatural powers and a boy hopelessly in love with her. This time we have Morishima Hodoka, a boy who ran away from home to live in Tokyo, who's hired by a journalist and his niece. They investigate the abnormal weather patterns hitting Tokyo, which is attributed to the legend of the Weather Maiden. In a chance encounter, Hodoka meets Amano Hina, a girl capable of manipulating the weather, and the two quickly become friends. Using her weather controlling powers, the two start a business where they provide clear weather for people running outdoor events. However, since both are living without an adult guardian, and because Hodoka is wanted by the police for running away, the two abandon their business and have to flee the authorities. Beyond that, more complications arise, but I don't want to give too much away because it's better that you see for yourselves. Much like Your Name, this is a film with spectacular animation, most notably the weather effects. From the weight of each raindrop during storms to the bright sunny weather, this is another film where every still frame is a work of art. And yes, much like Your Name, it relies heavily on the same narrative tropes as seen in shonen anime, but that's to be expected, and the film still manages to tell a wonderful story that tugs at your heartstrings. Combined with some lovable characters and some intriguing world building, Weathering with You is the best animated film I saw this year. Number 2. John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. The John Wick films have to be the greatest action films of the current age, offering non-stop adrenaline-pumping action, wrapped inside some of the most gorgeous and stylish cinematography, and led by the very likable Keanu Reeves. Now, the John Wick series is actually something I only recently discovered, and so I was ecstatic to hear that a third film was releasing in 2019, making it my first chance to see a John Wick film in the cinema. And this film left me physically exhausted. There's only one other film that has done this to me, Mad Max Fury Road, a film I'd rank amongst my favorite films of all time, and a prime example of what a film should be, in my opinion. A pure audiovisual experience that engrosses the viewer from start to finish. The fight scenes are just as spectacular as the previous films, showing more creative ways of killing people in a series of unique environments. At this point in the series, Wick has taken so much abuse, it makes me wonder just how much more can this guy take? He's reaching superhuman levels of endurance. It's quite ridiculous, but that's why I love these films. Aside from that, the film also introduces another layer of intrigue as it explores more of the inner workings of the underground guild of hitmen, whatever they are called. Most evident in this film with the introduction of the adjudicator, the one who enforces the rules of business and administers punishment in accordance. However, the world building in these films only happens on a need-to-know basis, so we never know who set the rules, the origin of the guild itself, or how far the network of hitmen runs. In short, the John Wick films have an air of mystique and intrigue, and it's something that modern action films are lacking. My one criticism would be that it finishes on an inconclusive note, but all that means is that there are more John Wick films to look forward to, so if you haven't seen them yet, what are you waiting for? And my number 1 film of 2019 is Stuber. Nah, I'm just kidding. My number 1 film of 2019 was Joker. Yeah, probably the most divisive and controversial film of the year. A film that has polarized critics and audiences alike and has even sparked security concerns. But all controversy aside, what did I think of the film? Well, I could use a few words. Amazing, artistic, heartbreaking, gut-wrenching, intense, insane. I could use all the words in the world to describe this film, but I don't think words can do it justice. This film was so different and so unexpected, especially when compared to recent comic book films, which are all slick and beautiful with squeaky clean visuals and a hero embodying the best qualities humanity has to offer. this film was the complete opposite. Filthy, violent, and not pretty to look at, great cinematography notwithstanding, and the Joker is the antithesis to a modern superhero, not a man anyone should aspire to be. In saying that, however, the Joker is a tragic character, and in this film he's portrayed more as a victim of society, a society where the powers that be neglect and abuse the poor, sick, and disenfranchised. Arthur Fleck just wanted to live a normal life despite his severe mental condition. In fact, he tries his hardest to suppress his violent tendencies and doesn't become the Joker until the end of the film, at which point he becomes a martyr for an insurrection sweeping across Gotham. It's a twist on the Joker character, whereas traditionally he's depicted as a criminal mastermind, albeit unhinged, unpredictable, and commanding a gang of criminals. I don't want to give too much away, because again, I want people to see this film for themselves. So, I will leave you with my final thoughts on this film. Ethan Hawke once said, "A great film begins when you leave the theater." You know that feeling when you finish watching a film in the cinema and it takes you a while before you can get up and leave? And once you do, you start replaying the film in your head, and it's during these moments where the film can be fully appreciated as it takes on greater significance in relation to other films you've watched. This was one of those moments. Much like how John Wick 3 left me physically exhausted, Joker left me mentally exhausted. As I left the cinema and drove home, I couldn't help but think about this film. And in the coming days when I wrote my original review, and even up until now when I'm writing the script for this video, I can't think of another film that has left such an impression on me this year. In my mind, I can still hear the maniacal laughter of Arthur Fleck. I can still see the filthy streets of Gotham, the Joker dancing down the stairs, and so many other memorable scenes I can still see with clarity. Personally, this is the indication of a great film, one that replays in your mind even months after seeing it. I know this film has been divisive, and probably half the people listening will disagree with my placement of this film. But really, these are my genuine opinions on Joker. I believe with all sincerity that this is one of those films that will be discussed and referenced for years to come. I don't want to say it's a classic, because history will make that decision. But I will champion this film as one of the best ever made for as long as I live. And there you have my top 11 films of 2019. What does your list look like? Do you believe I've left something out? As always, feel free to leave a kindly worded comment or some constructive criticism in the comments below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and here's hoping 2020 will bring us some more amazing films. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you next year.